Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming in this nice, cool environment when it's 96 out. Please turn off your cell phone. Check and make sure. I'm going to give you some time to do that right now. As always, we start off by thanking our founder, our North Star, our guiding light, the person who came up with this crazy idea 10 years ago. Gee, I could do a writers' festival in the desert after visiting Sun Valley. Well, as you all know, we've far surpassed them, and we're very happy. Jamie Kabler. Our partners in this endeavor are the Rancho Mirage City Council and the City of Rancho Mirage. Today, we're lucky enough to have Mayor Steve Downs, his beautiful wife, Jerry Downs, and Mayor Pro Tem Ted Weil with us. Thank you. We have an incredible staff here. They're amazing. We couldn't do it without all of them. And we want to give a special thank you to Jordan Schnitzer, who's the underwriter of all these events and makes it possible for 200 people at every event to get a free book. Thanks, Jordan. And as always, thank you to our angels in the front couple of rows. Their sponsorship enables us to put on not only these events all year, but the big festival at the end of January. So thank you to all our angels. Follett Books is in the back. If you'd like to buy one of Julia's other books, please see them after the show. If you didn't get a copy of this book, please see them after the show. Line up on the left wall and we'll get everyone through the line to meet Julia. She'll be glad to autograph your book. Now, April 25th, our last event for the spring, we have Valerie Bertinelli. She wrote a new cookbook, and I'm lucky enough I get to interview her. So I hope you join us. On to today. Dubbed the Adele of Audiobooks by The New Yorker, Julia Whelan is an author, a screenwriter, a lifelong actor, and an acclaimed audiobook narrator of over 600 titles. Her performance of her own debut novel, the international bestseller My Oxford Year, garnered a Society of Voice Arts Award. Her 22 novel, Thank You for Listening, which I believe you all have in your lap, was a pick of the year, best of the year, picked by Amazon, Audible, and NPR, as well as a Goodreads Choice Award nominee and winner of the Golden Poppy. She's the founder of Audiobrary, a new audio publishing company and app, and her latest book, the 8-part audio series Casanova LLC, debuted on Audiobrary on Valentine's Day 2024. You don't have it because you can only listen to it, but you've got a bookmark in your book that will give you more information. She's also a Grammy-nominated audiobook director, a former writing tutor, a half-decent amateur baker, and a certified tea sommelier. Joining her is a man who's very smart, extremely handsome, and for me, the best narrator ever. Also my husband. Please welcome Doug Miller and Julia Whelan.
Did you write your own bio?
I don't know. That was all a surprise. I have to rest a little from that.
I know. I feel like we already did the whole show.
So normally when I say welcome, I'm welcoming someone to the desert. Maybe they haven't been here before. I love that I don't have to do that with you because you live here in the Coachella Valley. And do you love it like all of us?
Yes.
And this is also a first for me. If you look on the wall to our right, your left.
Oh my gosh.
Julia's book, Thank You for Listening, is highlighted over there.
Well done,
it's
library.
The first time
well
I've interviewed somebody that has a poster on the wall.
So impressed. If it was there before today, I'm going to be really impressed.
So I want to start right at the beginning.
Okay.
You're here because you narrate books, 500 or 600 books.
Yeah.
But I want to kind of go back to the beginning and find out a little bit about you and a little bit about your childhood. So can you kind of give us
an overview? It's like the flashback, like do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Yeah, sure. I was a child actor. I was a working child actor and mainly known for a television show that was on from 1999 to 2002 called Once and Again, which was on ABC. And that happened to be high school for me. And then I, through a series of circumstances, which we might get into, but I put a pause on acting and went to college. But I'm a child actor by origin.
But tell us about the show that you were in and what that involved.
Oh, well, it was a wonderful show that unfortunately is not streaming anywhere, so no one can see it. There's some episodes on YouTube, and the first 2 seasons are on DVD. But it was by Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz, who did 30-something and My So-Called Life. And it was kind of like the last really good prestige TV show before cable happened. So it was on network, and then the industry changed, and suddenly scripted shows were competing with like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and the reality onslaught. But it was a critically acclaimed show, and I had wonderful material to work with every week, and it made it a very hard act to follow. And that's actually part of the reason I didn't continue with on camera is nothing was really as good as that show.
So when you stopped, then where did your life go from there?
So I think we're starting to kind of have these discussions now about what the late 90s, early 2000s were like for women in media, but it wasn't great. And I was dealing with a transitional time from being, a child on television to then becoming a woman. And the business wants certain things of its actresses, and at that time particularly, there was only like one right way to be. And I remember I always wanted to do this because I wanted to be an actor. And when I'd sit in managers' offices or agents' offices, and they'd ask me, well, what kind of career do you want to have? And I would say, I want to be Gary Oldman. And that just did not compute for them. They were like, but I don't understand this and that. You can't have that career. That doesn't exist. And I was being... when you turn 18, everybody wants a certain thing from you. The scripts changed, they got darker, they got weirder. It just felt very exploitive, and I was ready to move on to other things and try other things. And so I went to college. I went to Middlebury College and studied writing. And to be fair, though, I always thought I would go back to acting, but by the time I graduated and moved back, the business had changed a lot. And in an actor's career, if you take 4 years off, you might as well have never had a career to begin with. The industry kind of forgets about you, and so I was starting from the ground floor again, and I was like, something's got to give.
And you just didn't go to college back east here. You went to Oxford.
I did, yes. Also went to Oxford, yes.
And I think you're going to a ball there next week?
To a ball there next week, yeah.
Tell us.
My college there is, I still am very close with them. And I actually wrote, if anyone's read my Oxford year, the college that Jamie teaches at is Lincoln College. And that was my college. I don't think we have a thing. Are we imps? I think we're imps. Go imps. Not a very sporty thing, Oxford.
So I saw a couple interviews in preparation for this. I watched some YouTube interviews of you, and you said 2 really interesting things. You said, quote, I see the world as an actor, and I wondered what you meant by that.
I wonder too. No, I think I see the world as an actor because I still am constantly looking at character and relationship, and it's what has helped me the most, I think, as a writer. I encounter the world through the lens of story and how the personalities shape the story and motivation, and asking those good old character questions of why are people doing what they're doing.
And I almost feel like this question I should ask at the end, but I want to ask it now since we're kind of talking about acting. You also said in one of those that acting was your first love. Is that still true?
I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's still true. I mean, I've been doing it the longest. I've been doing it since I was 5, actually, and I just, it's where I feel the most comfortable. It's also the thing I'm like actually qualified to do. Everything else, I just kind of figured it out on the fly. But that's how, I still enjoy that. And it's also something that it's like riding a bike for me, that when I do it, I fall right back into it and love it.
So after college, was it your goal to go back to acting?
It was my goal to go back to acting, but I honestly had such a misconception of the business. I really thought I would just like go back to LA and get my old job back. But the industry had changed. HBO had just really started, and Breaking Bad was on the air, and suddenly movie stars wanted to do TV, and so they were taking my job. And you know, it just, as we said, there's only so much for a woman in their mid-20s to do, and I was getting the typical feedback of you either need to lose 10 pounds and be a leading lady or gain 15 pounds and be the best friend, but there's no in between. And it was just incredibly, incredibly limited.
So tell us how you got interested in or found out about audiobook narrating.
Yeah, so a good friend of mine from college who actually went to Middlebury with me and to Oxford with me, her mother happened to be an audiobook producer and director at a company called Brilliance. And at my college graduation, she came up to me. I'll admit I was like a little drunk. And she came up to me and said, you know, with your child actor background, and I was an English and creative writing major, she said, I think this might be a good thing for you to do. You might be good at this. And I had never listened to an audiobook. I didn't know what they were. And I, again, at that time was planning to just go back to LA and get my old job back. And so I kind of was like, no, we'll talk. And within about a year of being back in LA, and I was tutoring and, you know, making ends meet, and I called her up and I said, okay, so what is this thing? Like, I just read books into a microphone. That's how this works. And I put together a demo and sent it off to her, and she gave me 2 YA novels that I went out to Michigan to record.
2 what novels?
Young adult novels. Okay. YA for people in the know. And
well, it's like lawyers, you know.
You have your whole language too.
Yeah. So.
And that's how it started. And I started my first year. I maybe did 4 books, and then it just kind of started snowballing. And at the height of everything, when I was going slowly insane, I was doing 70 or 80 books a year. I don't recommend it. This isn't commendable. It's not a goal.
Do you remember the very first book you narrated?
I do. It was called Need by Carrie Jones. And I also recorded a book at the same time. Like, we did 2 days of that and then 2 days for this other book called Peace, Love, and Baby Ducks by Lauren Myracle.
And is there a book where you consciously were able to say you were aware that, oh my gosh, this kind of cemented my reputation, my profession as an audiobook narrator?
There were a couple of books that happened early on that I thought, these are great books, and I ended up getting attention for them, but I could never predict. So I think part of this has to do with the fact that this industry wasn't this industry then. This is 15 years ago. And so you never knew who was listening to audiobooks. Social media wasn't really a thing. There was no feedback, really, in this industry. So I did one YA novel called The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson, which was beautiful and was actually shortlisted or longlisted for a Grammy. And that was the first time I went, am I good at this? And then the second one was Gone Girl, where but I read Gone Girl, and that's the one time I've ever been right about a book where I said, this is going to be a sensation. And nailed it. But, you know. But again, I didn't know about audio. I did not know that was actually the book. People talk about that book as being the book that kind of made audiobooks and Audible kind of happen, because it was such a zeitgeisty moment that it was like people who didn't have the time to read it just went, oh, I wonder if I can listen to it. And I hear from a lot of people that was the first audiobook they ever did because it was such a phenomenon.
And in a moment, she's going to read from it, but I want to ask some questions first. So,
yeah.
And again, maybe I should ask this at the end, but when narrating...
There's no right way to do this.
I know. And I'm the judge. I get to do what I want.
I know. Yeah, we're not doing that. This is not like right or wrong.
So it seems like today, since I've kind of met you, got to know you, you and your husband, I mean, you have fans. Is it always been like that? I mean, where people associated you with being a narrator as opposed to just you narrated a book?
You know, this has been an interesting turning point, and it really has to do with audiobooks becoming so massive. So I was always one of those actors where people knew my face but not my name. And what was very interesting about the switch to audio is that suddenly people knew my name but not my face. And so, which is a fame I much prefer. I love this part of it so much. But so I didn't have a sense of this until, I mean, I would get awards and I would have good feedback and I would hear from people. I love listening to anything you do, but it was actually when I went out on tour for this book and was seeing the rooms like this, where people were coming out to see me, that I just had, because otherwise I do my work in a 4x4 sound booth. And 4 months later, people listen to it. It's a very detached sort of thing. I don't have a lot of interaction. So it took that.
So I want to talk about that 4x4 booth, and I want to talk about the process of narrating a book. But the first question I want to ask is, we're going to hear her read in a minute, and you can judge for yourself.
Oh, God.
But do you have a narrating book voice as opposed to your conversational voice?
Yeah, if anyone was here for the Writers' Festival, I was interviewing General Petraeus, and he knows my work from, I also record journalism for an app called Autumn that was then rolled into the New York Times app. And so that's how General Petraeus knew my work. And when he asked me to read for him and I started reading it, and he was like, no, but in your narrator voice. It's like, okay, General.
But did you feel like you had a narrator
voice? Oh, I definitely have a narrator voice, but I don't think that, I mean, this is not my narrator voice, but for me, kind of two reasons. One is I like to just like leave my work at work. I think it would be a little weird and creepy if I were in my narrator voice all the time. And I also, it doesn't mean that it's false. Like it's not a pretension.
No, and I didn't mean it like that.
No, I know you didn't. But it's something that I try to be as accessible and easy for a listener. And also there's a certain consistency that I think people expect. So even if I'm changing it slightly for genre or for category, it's still like a familiarity that people expect and want.
So tell us about the process. How do you even get contacted to do a book? And then what do you do in that regards after you've agreed to narrate a book?
So typically I'm contacted by the publisher, by the audio producer at the publisher who has a manuscript. And this is usually 4 to 5 months before publication. And they say, we have a title we'd like for you to record. Here's the window where you can record, where we will have the finished manuscript, and then the book comes out. And can you do it? And here's what it is. And I don't have time to read the book before I make this decision. They don't have time to wait for me to read the book. So I have to go on the synopsis, the author, if I frankly want to. I think of this, like my selection process is really down to if I were walking through the library and I saw a synopsis, would I pick up that book? And usually schedule is important too. But so I get the manuscript, I prep the manuscript, so I read it for a character list, and then I keep track of any vocal traits that the author gives individual characters, accents, tone, anything like that.
So that's a written list that you're making.
I'm old school, yeah. And then I also keep a word list of words that I don't know how to pronounce or I want to verify with an author, especially if it's fantasy and they've made up a ton of names. And once I've got all of that together, I start kind of casting it in my brain, and I work out the character voices, how I'm going to actually perform it. And then I get all of my questions answered, and I go into the booth, and I start recording from page 1 And I go through and I top out at about 2 finished hours a day, which is about 4 to 5 hours in the booth. I don't like to do more than that, just mental fatigue, physical fatigue, all those things.
So when you say you get all your questions answered, who are you asking questions of?
Usually the author by way of the producer.
So not directly?
Some authors I have direct relationships with. There are certain authors who I've built worlds with, where it's like I said, these fantasy series or something, and we're creating accents, and we're, because based on these fantasy authors have like a whole, methodology, and everything they have more material than ever ends up in the book, and so I'm really working with them to try to create the best oral translation of their world.
And is there a director or an editor as you go along the process?
There's typically not a director. Sometimes there's a director, but typically not. It's usually just me by myself saying, was that good? I don't know. And then I send the raw files off to an editor who listens along, who reads along and listens, and then they mark the mistakes that I make, which is always horrifying. They always come back to me and I'm like, I did not say that. I did. Spoiler, I said that. And I make the corrections, I send it back to them, they splice it into the finished audio, they master it, they sweeten it, and that's the process.
And, books have children, adults, women, men. How do you figure that out, how to do those voices?
I think this is just experience and trial and error and testing what works. I mean, honestly, if I could take like the first probably 70 books I did and just wipe them from existence, I would be much happier. Because this was not also, because this industry was not this industry when I started, there wasn't a way to learn how to do this other than just by doing it. And at that time, you would go into studios. So I learned a lot from other narrators or being directed at that time, especially by other narrators, and we kind of were all learning from each other. But once the industry moved to recording from home in our own studios, you just kind of lost that training ground. And so, I figured it out along the way. But so for the characters, I will usually look at that character list that I make, and I'll figure out which ones are the most in conversation with each other. There's usually 4 to 8 characters in a book that are the main characters and that are often in conversation. And so I'll try to differentiate those voices as much as possible to start with.
Have you ever had to sing in a book? And I haven't heard you sing, so I don't know if you're, good or not. But
so, do you? Interestingly, they typically won't let you sing. It's a rights issue. You can't have music in a book. That said, the one that I just did for myself, Casanova LLC, there is singing in it. There's actually a fully produced song in it.
And do you do it line by line? I mean, you don't do something on page 24 and then maybe come back to page 12. It's just get in the booth and do line by line.
Yeah.
And the booth at your house, can you describe it?
As we established, 4x4, covered in gray carpet. It's real fancy looking. It's a double wide wall. So the difference is like with studio sound, you're trying to keep the sound in, for audiobooks, the goal is to keep sound out. And out here in the desert, we obviously have a lot of gardeners, so many gardeners. And because when I first moved here, I was like, this is great. No one's ever here. It's so quiet. Everybody goes to bed at like 5. Like, this is fantastic. And then I forgot about the gardeners. So most of my life is waiting for a leaf blower to be over.
So it seems unique that you started as an actor. So does acting influence how you narrate a book?
Absolutely.
And tell us
how. Again, I think looking at everything through a character lens helps me, and not just the characters on the page. Like, I think that one of the things that clicked in for me as I started doing the job was that you have the characters on the page that you're trying to represent fully and authentically, but then you also have the narrative voice of the piece. You have the authorial voice of the piece, which is sometimes the author, but sometimes it's its own, construct. And being true to that, and then from there you're finding the rhythm of the piece, you're finding the tone. And so I think just having a sensitivity in the way that I would read a screenplay, for instance, and know whether it's 3-camera comedy or whether it's, a darker, melodrama. I think like that's what's been the most valuable, having just, and also as an actor, having emotional accessibility, knowing how to go in and out of wherever a character may be at that moment. And with audiobooks, the main challenge is just the vast amount of material, like 100 pages a day, just getting through it and being quick enough to do that.
So, in my life, I've been in the courtroom for almost 50 years, and when you instruct a jury, you tell them that they are the person that's going to determine the facts. The judge just makes decisions on the law. The jury has to tell us what the facts are and what the correct facts are. And one of the issues is the credibility of witnesses. And we tell them, you need to look at them, you need to watch them, you need to listen to them, you need to observe them so that you can make that judgment in your mind.
Yeah.
How do you communicate that in a book? Because we all have mm-hms and pauses in our speech patterns. Do you try to communicate that in the narrating?
Again, these are the things you just learn from having done so many, but I do think like at the beginning, this was a problem. Like as an actor, what you work with is an emotional, physical, and vocal synthesis, all of those components to bring a character to life. And when you knock out physical, you don't have your full tool set. And so I have found over the course of time ways to maybe try to put into my voice something that I would be conveying in my face. And that just came from looking back, being like I would deliver something very dryly, the way I would do it on camera. And then I would listen back and say, that wasn't funny. Like, I don't get the humor because I'm not seeing an actor be like, So it's a learning process. There have been times where I try to build in space, just silence in an audiobook, and I will send a note along to an editor saying, please don't tighten this. Like, you need that for the emotional shift in a book. Like, just trying to find ways to translate emotion without, I can't, for instance, add ums or trip over things, which becomes a problem actually when you're doing a character that has an accent where English is a second language, because so much of that kind of stutter of trying to get to the word you're looking for, you can't do it. It's got to be letter perfect.
And from beginning to end, what's basically the time estimate it takes?
Well, so depends on the length of the book, but an audiobook is calculated by finished hours. So if it's 10 finished hours, it took me about 20 hours to record it, and then it took me another 20 hours to read it and prep it. So it's about a 4-to-1 ratio.
Can you read some of your books?
Sure.
Can you narrate some of these?
I can, yes, in the General Petraeus voice. General Petraeus approved voice.
So you're going to tell us a little bit about it.
Okay.
But maybe in the process of these books, because what I thought was interesting about the books that you picked is they're not emotionally easy books even to read.
Yes.
And so I want you at some point to talk about how it might impact you, the book, and what you're reading from the page, and then how you try to communicate that to the person who's listening.
Sure.
Tell us about education.
Okay, so show of hands, who has read okay, right. This came out in 2018, I believe, and it's a memoir. And I have a different responsibility, I feel, when I do memoir, to be as true as possible to the author's intent and to not embellish it. So for this, if you read this, it's really so difficult. And as a reader, it's very difficult to get through. But what I found fascinating about her approach to her story is Tara had already processed a lot of it and was in such a place of grace with what had happened to her that I could not bring whatever anger or anything that angst that I was feeling about it to the read. I had to just channel her ease with what she'd processed. So I'm just going to read from the first page of this, because I think with memoir, the other thing is there's something about welcoming a reader in. It's like when you go to a party that you're maybe not invited to, and you kind of walk in, and you're like, I'm going to go hang out by the bar for a little bit and just see what's going on. And I feel like my job is to come up to you and just get you a drink and say, see that person over there and this person over here, and just kind of introduce you to the world. So I'm standing on the red railway car that sits abandoned next to the barn. The wind soars, whipping my hair across my face and pushing a chill down the open neck of my shirt. The gales are strong this close to the mountain, as if the peak itself is exhaling. Down below, the valley is peaceful, undisturbed. Meanwhile, our farm dances. The heavy conifer trees sway slowly, while the sagebrush and thistles quiver, bowing before every puff and pocket of air. Behind me, a gentle hill slopes upward and stitches itself to the mountain base. If I look up, I can see the dark form of the Indian princess. Turning toward our house on the hillside, I see movements of a different kind, tall shadows stiffly pushing through the currents. My brothers are awake, testing the weather. I imagine my mother at the stove, hovering over bran pancakes. I picture my father hunched by the back door, lacing his steel-toed boots and threading his calloused hands into welding gloves. On the highway below, the school bus rolls past without stopping. I am only 7, but I understand that this is the fact more than any other that makes my family different. We don't go to school. Dad worries that the government will force us to go, but it can't because it doesn't know about us. 4 of my parents' 7 children don't have birth certificates. We have no medical records because we were born at home and have never seen a doctor or nurse. We have no school records because we've never set foot in a classroom. When I am 9, I will be issued a delayed certificate of birth, but at this moment, according to the state of Idaho and the federal government, I do not exist. It's so good. Thank you.
So was that good or what?
It's so, thank you. Well,
it's almost like I should go sit down and you should finish reading it.
The writing does so, that's the other thing that you learn. I mean, part of where people are, there was like, when I have fans, and I'm just able to say that, especially at this point in my career, I have just an embarrassment of riches of good books, and the writing does half the work, and it is such a pleasure to be in a book when the writing is that good.
But you can, and I'm not just saying this, you can see why you have fans and why people want you to narrate it, because it is easy to listen to. But I also like what you said about you do pause a little, and there are emphases that you would probably, if you're reading, that's how they would supposed to be. So.
Well, and I think that there's also something about, again, it's a understanding that, especially for a listener, we all listen at different speeds. We all retain information differently, and so giving people a moment to download what was just said, especially the important information. Again, you just learn how to build that in to the read.
So I had a question later that I'm going to ask you now.
Okay.
You talked about speed, something I didn't even know. I don't even know where it is on my Audible book thing, that you can increase or slow down the speed of your voice.
Yes.
Is that something you care about or like?
Okay, so for years, I used to be the person out there saying, no, don't slow it down. It's my performance. I chose to do it that way. You're messing with, also when you speed it up, voices get higher. And I have a joke with a friend of mine where I said, I think maybe I had this horrifying realization recently that maybe the only reason I'm successful is because you can speed up my voice and I don't sound like Minnie Mouse. And I was like, oh God, is that it? But I have since, in talking to people, apparently, if you are in any way neurodivergent or have ADHD, for a lot of people, audiobooks don't work because they just get distracted. But when they can speed it up, it then is going at the speed of their brain. And so it makes them able to consume material that they wouldn't normally consume. And I was like, well, okay, you win. Forget my performance, it's fine.
Gone Girl.
Yes. I hope no one's easily offended in this room. So this is the one that started it all. I tried to find, obviously, a tamer part to read, but if you know this book, that's kind of impossible. But I love this book and the section I'm going to read because, as an actor, psychos are fun. There's nothing more fun. And I love scenes between couples. So it's just in all forms, whatever that is. I just find, again, this is the actor part of me and the relationship-driven part of me. And so this is from, I mean, I always feel weird about doing spoilers, but like it's been out 12 years. There was a movie. So this is when after she's come home, and she says, "And if I don't divorce you, you'll divorce me?" I ask. "I don't want to be married to a woman like you. I want to be married to a normal person." Piece of shit. I see. You want to revert to your lame, limp, loser self. You want to just walk away? No. You don't get to go be some boring-ass middle American with some boring-ass girl next door. You tried it already. Remember, baby? Even if you wanted to, you couldn't do that now. You'll be known as the philandering asshole who left his kidnapped, raped wife. You think any nice woman will touch you? You'll only get psychos, crazy psycho bitches. He's pointing at me, jabbing the air. Don't call me that. Psycho? It'd be so easy for him to write me off that way. He'd love that, to be able to dismiss me so simply. Everything I do for a reason, Nick, I say. Everything I do takes planning and precision and discipline. You are a petty, selfish, manipulative, disciplined, psycho bitch. You are a man, I say. You are an average, lazy, boring, cowardly, woman-fearing man. Without me, that's what you would have kept on being, ad nauseum. But I made you into something. You were the best man you've ever been with me, and you know it. The only time in your life you've ever liked yourself was pretending to be someone I might like. Without me, you're just your dad. Don't say that, Amy. He balls up his fists. They're so much fun.
So when you read this book, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess you'd already agreed you were going to do it, but when you read it to make your lists and start the process, did you say, what have I done? I mean...
No, I loved this book from the moment I read. I loved the first 5 pages. I was also, the co-narrator on this is Kirby Hayborn, who is a consummate narrator and has done, 1,000 titles. He's done so many. And he does all of Nick's sections. And so we had some coordination over, voices and how we were going to share certain character voices and what we were doing. But no, I just remembered that this was pure gold. It's still the most fun I've ever had in the booth. I went in 2 years ago to do some 10-year anniversary bonus material. And I just was like, can I just re-record the whole thing? Because my voice has changed so much in 10 years too. I feel like so many miles on my voice now. But yeah, no, I loved it.
So tell us about dual narrations, how that works.
So in this case, dual narration is when you have 2 narrators doing alternating chapters in their own voices. And they will do all of the characters in their sections. And usually when that's the case, you'll coordinate with your co-narrator on how are we doing generally these other characters, knowing that you're never actually going to sound exactly the same, and I will never actually sound like Kirby, who's playing Nick, but the audience can suspend their disbelief. Then there's duet narration, which is how I actually did Casanova LLC, which sounds more like a radio play. So you have one narrator who's doing their sections, but within their sections, other actors are doing the voices of different characters.
So there's lawyers, and I was one of them, that when they try a case, it's hard for them to stand behind a podium and not move. Mm-hmm. And in the federal court, you have to stand behind the podium. In my courtroom, I would let them, within reason, walk behind them.
I always like this. I like the pacing for the lawyer.
Well, is it hard for you just to sit in a chair?
Yeah, I'm not doing it well, even here. I was noticing as I was doing it, I was like, don't move. And then I was like, you don't have, because you can't move on mic. This is actually better. I don't know why we don't just do this all the time. But you can't move. The things you learn about yourself. My wrist cracks, all the time. And so I can't move my hands because it'll crack over dialogue. But yeah, so you've got to just kind of be very, very stationary. And again, that's what makes it hard as an actor, not having that extra set of skills.
So here you talk with your hands too. You don't do that in the booth?
I can't, no.
Okay.
Which is probably why the narrator voice is so calm.
And I know we have an audience, so you make facial expressions, but in the booth, is it just blank?
No. You have to make the facial expressions, otherwise nothing's going on. No, I mean, that's where so much of the emotion comes from. And if anything, it's probably, like, I probably need to dial it back if I were to do on camera again, because I think I'd probably do it too big to compensate for not being able to move.
But it's almost, again, like I asked about, what you do to communicate something. Like this read, you, with your face and your hands, but with your voice, they all worked together and you communicated what was trying to be said by the author. So,
thank you.
The giver of stars.
Oh, see? I mean, okay, so first of all, this is a fun book for me because I have been a huge fan of Jojo Moyes for years. She's one of my favorite authors. My Oxford year was actually very much informed by Me Before You. And I just kind of always thought, well, I'll never get to do a Jojo Moyes novel because she's a British novelist writing about Britain. And then the next book she wrote happened to be about pack horse librarians in Kentucky in the 1930s. And I somehow got it. I've never replied faster to an email. I saw the subject line, Jojo Moyes' new book, and I was like, yep, yes, what do you need? What are we doing? So I wanted to read this one because I think the acting background that I bring to this is I like doing character voices, and audiobooks have that's opened up in the last 15 years since I started doing this, that they really do feel more immersive. People do voices, and now we're kind of at this turning point where I've heard some people recently say, dial back on the character voices, and I will just say to any narrator who's listening, especially a new narrator, you just have to do them well. And the character voices can't be caricatures, they have to be characters. I see the movie in my head when I record, so I play the characters the way I would instruct an actor to play them. And to me, something like this helps someone who may not be familiar with the region or the people, or they don't understand these characters. This helps them understand the story in a way that I don't think you get when you just read the text. So these pack horse librarians go up to this ramshackle shack in the hollers, and one of them hops off and says, "Good morning." Marjorie walked halfway toward the door. "Hello?" There was no sound, then the creak of a board, and a man appeared in the doorway, a rifle cocked on his shoulder. He wore overalls that had not troubled a washtub in some time, and a clay pipe emerged from under a bushy mustache. Behind him, 2 young girls appeared, their heads tilted as they tried to peer at the visitors. He gazed out suspiciously. "How you doing, Jim Horner?" Marjorie walked into the little fenced-off enclosure, it could barely be called a garden, and closed the gate behind them. She appeared not to notice the gun, or if she did, she ignored it. Alice felt her heart race a little, but followed obediently. "Who's this?" The man nodded at Alice. "This is Alice. She's helping me with the traveling library. I wondered if we could talk to you about what we got." "Well, I don't want to buy nothing." "Well, that suits me fine because we ain't selling nothing. I'll take just 5 minutes of your time." And then, sorry, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit here. She's the one from England. She does say England, which cracks me up. So I'm not sure if you've heard from town, but we got a book library going. It's for those who like stories or to help your children get educated a little, especially if they don't go to the mountain school. And I came by because I wondered if you'd like to try some books for yours. "I told you they don't read." "Yes, you did, so I brought some easy ones just to get them going. These ones here got pictures and all the letters so they can learn by themselves. Don't even have to go to school to do it. They can sit right here in your home." She handed him one of the picture books. He lowered his gun and took the book gingerly, as if she were handing him something explosive, and flicked through the pages. "I need the girls to help with the picking and canning." "Oh, sure you do. Busy time of year." "I don't want them distracted." "I understand. Can't have nothing slowing the cannon. I have to say, it looks like the corn is going to be fine this year. Not like last year, huh?" Marjorie smiled as the girl arrived in front of them. Jim Horner pushed the book toward her.
They want money for those things. No, well, see, that's the beauty of it, Jim. No money, no signing up, no nothing. Library just exists so people can try a bit of reading, maybe learn a little if they find they have a liking for it. Jim Horner stared at the cover of the book. Alice had never heard Marjorie talk so much in one sitting. I'll tell you what, how about I leave these here just for the week? You don't have to read them, but you can take a look at them if you like. We'll come by next Monday and pick them up again. If you like them, you get the kids to tell me and I'll bring you some more. You don't like them, just leave them on a crate by the fence post there and we'll say no more. How's that sound? Alice glanced behind her. I don't think so. Tell you the truth, you'd do me a favor. Would mean I don't have to carry the darn things all the way back down the mountain. Boy, our bags are heavy today. Alice, you finished your water there? We don't want to take up any more of this gentleman's time. Good to see you, Jim. And thank you, May. Haven't you grown like a string bean since I last saw you? As they reached the gate, Jim Horner's voice lifted and hardened. I don't want anybody else coming up here bothering us. I don't want to be bothered, and I don't want my children bothered. They got enough to deal with. Marjorie didn't even turn around. She lifted a hand. I hear you, Jim. And we don't need no charity. I don't want anyone from town just coming by. I don't know why you even came here. Headed to all the houses between here and Berea, but I hear you. Yeah. It's hard being a librarian.
You're so good. I don't even have to say anything about that one. So the last one.
Okay, well, this is printed out because the library does not have a copy of The Women right now. No library in America has a copy of The Women right now. This is The Women by Kristen Hanna. And here's, to your question about reading straight through and why you read straight through and you don't just go through and do a character at a time and then go back and pick it up. When you're dealing with the rhythm of a specific scene, and again, it's kind of creating that movie in people's heads, you want, oh, you know what's interesting? I managed to print the wrong pages. So we're not going to do this one. Sorry, go listen to the audiobook. This was all a very elaborate scheme to get you to download the audiobook. Sorry.
The book's too popular because I tried to get it here.
No, it's impossible. It's impossible right now. 1 million copies sold in the first 3 weeks.
Okay, so if you're not busy enough with all that you do with audiobooks, you decided to write your own books.
I did.
Why was that?
So I think a lot of people assume that because I was recording a lot of books, I decided maybe I could do this. And actually, that's not the case. I went to school for writing. I was a creative writing major. I was writing the whole time. This job is just what happened in the interim and helped me pay the bills, but it made me a much better writer because I was reading so widely. And I was reading books I would have never normally picked up, and it exposed me to a lot of different categories and genres that I was not used to. So I started, my first book was my Oxford year, and that actually came out of a screenplay that I had been working on, not an original, something I was hired to work on. And then the producers got to know that I had very strong opinions about the story. And they asked me if I thought there might be a novel here. And I said, oh my God, nothing's ever wanted to be a book more. And so I feel like I fostered that story. I took it, I made it my own, and that's my Oxford year. And then once I was in that kind of women's fiction rom-com space, I wrote Thank You for Listening, which is a rom-com, a romantic comedy set in the audiobook world, about 2 audiobook narrators who fall in love while recording an audiobook, but they don't know who the other one is because they're recording under aliases.
And they're not recording?
They're not recording together. So it's like You've Got Mail in the audiobook world. Yeah.
So did you narrate your own book?
I did.
And was that a hard process?
Yes. My Oxford year was actually painful. Thank You for Listening was much more fun. And then Casanova, so if you've read Thank You for Listening, the book that they're recording in Thank You for Listening, the romance that they're recording is called Casanova LLC. And that story, which had this ridiculous premise when I started, which is about a gigolo who, it's really romancy, guys. A gigolo who is descended from Casanova, who has this one girl he's never been able to stop thinking about, and they're supposed to just be together for a weekend. That's what he does, and that's not how it goes. So that was the book that they're recording in this, and that crazy idea wouldn't let me go. And so I did it, I wrote it, and we recorded it, and for that I brought other narrators in to play other roles.
And so when you're narrating your own book, did you get to a paragraph and say, oh my God, I want to change that?
Oh God, that's why my Oxford year was brutal, is I had such debut novelist imposter syndrome that I wanted to change everything. And my editor was finally like, you have to stop, you can't do this. And so with Thank You for Listening, I made sure I'd read that book out loud about 10 times. And so it was a much better process.
So I want to talk about where you are now.
Yeah.
Tell us about Audiobrary.
Audiobrary. So Audiobrary is my attempt to fix...
And it fits in with, I was going to ask you, how audiobook narrators get paid. So
yes.
That's kind of the premise.
Good job. Yes, that's the lead in, because that's what I'm trying to fix. So,
The world's best library.
Oh my gosh. Did you just print this in the back?
Do you remember which pages?
No. Well, it's somewhere in here, 76. But anyway, so with...
Tell us about Audiobrary.
Okay,
first.
fine. So with Audiobrary, the main problem is that this industry has not caught up with how popular audiobooks are. So narrators historically have always been paid per finished hour. We don't get paid for the research we do. We don't get paid for the time it takes to prep the book. And we are paid minimally per finished hour at that, which is why you have to do 70 books a year to keep your head above water. The biggest issue is that narrators don't get royalties. And that meant something when it used to be audiobooks had to be printed on books on tape and, produced and published and distributed, and they were a tangible thing, but now they're not. And now they're digital, and the cost is extremely low. And narrators have their own profiles and their own followings, and it doesn't matter if I do a Kristen Hanna novel or if I'm doing a smaller book. It doesn't matter to me. I get paid the same. And when people ask me what my villain origin story is for starting Audiobrary, it's because I always say kind of glibly that I was paid $2,500 for Gone Girl 12 years ago. So Audiobrary fixes this systemic wrong. We give narrators royalties. We are also, my intention is to create a kind of haven for human storytelling as synthetic voice is coming into the market. And, that was always going to happen. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that people think they can disrupt and find a way to make even more money on. And for me, I want the human storytelling connection, and I want to make sure that that is sustainable for the future, which means paying people properly, giving them a back end, getting that... creating a space where that can still exist when a lot of other places are going to move to synthetic voice.
So tell them how they get Audiobrary.
Oh, so just go to audiobrary.com. You can download the app, the Audiobrary app right now, and in there are a couple of little freebies there's an about section about why I started it, and then there's instructions on how to order projects. And we just got rolling. So right now, Casanova LLC is up there, and my books are up there in audio. And I'll also be doing a poetry collection in a couple of weeks that's the poetry of my Oxford year. So if you like Victorian poetry, that will be coming out shortly.
Casanova came out on Valentine's Day, right?
Casanova came out on Valentine's. All 8 episodes are out, so if you order it now, you'll get it as basically a book.
So I want to end with the reading.
Okay.
And I think I'd like you to. People will have to go buy that book on.
I'll read.
I
from
want
this
you
a
to
little
end
bit.
with this.
I'll read from this a little bit. So.
Tell them the book.
Okay, so Thank You for Listening. As I said, I explained what it's about, but it's also about the most autobiographical part of it, because even though it's about audiobooks, it's also about a woman who finds herself as a caretaker for her grandmother who is suffering from dementia, and that's honestly the most autobiographical part of the book. So I want to read something that's a description of when she's talking, she asks her grandmother what it's like to be in this dementia kind of fog. And I just want to say that I think we have this misunderstanding of autobiography, or when writers write about their lives. I change things for fiction. It's not me, But I think by changing it, we invite other people in. And in books, that's how we find out how similar we are. So Sewanee asks her grandmother, whose name is Blah Blah. She says, "Do you remember calling me last night?" Blah sighed. "No." "Well, sort of. God damn it. I'm sorry, doll. There's nothing to be sorry for. Tell me what happened. I want to know." Though she sounded as if she didn't, not really. Sewanee left the booth. She needed space to breathe, to think, to talk. "You were upset and frustrated? You said you were late for something? You thought I was bitsy?" "Well, shit," Blah Blah said thinly. Sewanee sat on the floor, back against the outside wall of the booth, and tucked her knees into her chest. "Are you aware of... Do you know when it's happening?" "Not a clue. There's some kind of before and after, but the middle, black as night." She exhaled. "I hate it, doll. I need a prescription for dumb pills." Sewanee snorted. "I don't think that's what they're called." "Well, that's the generic." They both chuckled at that. "Betty Lou McCarthy lived in the hollers." Sewanee hated being right. "Who's that?" "School friend. And if I was out there when the fog rolled in, I wasn't going nowhere. Happened in an instant, like God poured gravy over everything. You could barely see your hand in front of your face, and shapes you knew were out there, the old oak, the mailbox, her daddy's truck, all those comforts would get sinister. They moved around, weren't where they were supposed to be." Sewanee didn't dare interject. "It feels something like that when it starts. Then people are born out of that fog. Some I recognize, some I don't. Everything shifts. I can't imagine. It's kind of like being on a sound stage, doing a big dance number. Stage hands take up a backdrop and lower another. A desk flies in on wheels. A soda fountain disappears, and now there's a door, and in comes Jean, and we're tapping away at an office building instead of a diner." "God," Sewanee murmured quietly, not wanting to break this spell of clarity. "And then, well, what the hell was I? Dancing, wasn't I?" Sewanee swallowed. "You were talking about everything shifting around you, what it feels like in your mind. Did you want to say something else about it?" "Oh, I'm just rambling." Blah cleared her throat, and her voice was crisper when she said, "Anyway, this is all to say, doll." Sewanee heard the rustling of paper on the other end. "I think I'm going to need more help, that it might be time to take the next step before I don't know where the step is." Sewanee hadn't known it was possible to feel relief and shock at the same time. She sat forward. "No, you don't have to worry about any of that. Soon you're going to have another place, at Seasons. You'll be just down the hall in memory care, okay? More help when you need it, but you'll still have Mitzi and Bertie and Amanda and, of course, me. You'll have me whether you like it or not." A charged kind of silence fell, like the expectant moment right after the power goes out, waiting for it to come back on. Sewanee heard paper rustling again. "Listen to me, doll. I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. And I love you so much. And I want you to do something for me. Anything. Promise me. I promise anything. Good. When the next step comes, you are not to visit me anymore. You..." Sewanee jerked. "What are you..." "No, let me finish. No visits, no phone calls. You are not to be any part of this." "Of what?" "My end." All of Sewanee's blood rushed to her head. "I'm coming over. You're going to say this to my face." No, you're not. I've thought this through, thought it all out. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget." The paper shook near the phone. "I've decided. It's done. Now, enough of all that. I want to tell you about Bertie." "I don't want to hear about Bertie. What are you..." "We are not discussing this." Blah's voice cracked, and Sewanee's eye filled with tears as if they shared a body. "Endings are messy, and I'll be damned if you remember me as a mess." Sewanee was on her feet. "That is not how I'll remember you. I'll remember you at the pool and cruising around in the olds and trying on clothes and smoking and drinking and swearing and laughing and rolling your eyes at Mitzi. No, trust me, you'll remember the end." "Stop saying the end!" Sewanee was shouting. "Shut up about the end!" "Don't tell your grandmother to shut up," Blah sputtered. "Shut up, shut up, shut up!" After a silence in which Sewanee felt like all her nerve endings had been thrown into a blender, Blah laughed and kept laughing. Sewanee couldn't make her face smile the way she wanted to. Then Blah started to cry. To hear that and not be able to touch her could barely be endured. Eventually, Blah spoke. "It's just so sad, doll. Don't make us say goodbye. I can't bear it. I need you to understand that. Leave 'em laughing, remember? Please."